Mikey Keene is a Michigan Wolverine. Clayton Sayfie here with Anthony Broome on an instant reaction version of the Wolverine.com podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel. Like I said in past videos, heading down to Tampa, we'll have video of Bryce Underwood throwing at bowl practice before the ReliaQuest Bowl. So no better time to subscribe to the Wolverines YouTube channel. Also head to thewolverine.com for all of your coverage on not only Mikey Keene, Fresno State transfer quarterback heading to Michigan, but all things Michigan football, basketball, and recruiting. Anthony, Michigan lands their quarterback, Mikey Keene. He visited over the weekend. Entering his final year of eligibility, he's 5'11", 200 pounds, two-time All Mountain West honorable mention from Chandler, Arizona. Big-time connection that probably got him the nod to become Michigan's next transfer quarterback is that he played under Chip Lindsey, new offensive coordinator for the Wolverines at UCF in 2022. He spent the 2021 and 22 seasons at UCF, then the last 2 years at Fresno State. He's played in 39 career games with 34 starts. If the name sounds familiar, I think all Michigan fans know by now that Mikey Keene played against the Wolverines on August 31st. Michigan wins 30-10. He went 22 of 36 for 235 yards and one touchdown with two picks. And now, he already has experience playing in the big house. He's going to be playing in the big house a lot more next year. Let's start with how it happened. There were a few options that kind of emerged over the last week after Billy Edwards Jr. decided to go to Wisconsin. He's the Maryland transfer. Three kind of came about. It was Daquan Finn out of Baylor, played at Toledo as well, where he made his name. Brendan Lewis out of Nevada, they targeted as well. He ends up going to Memphis. And then Mikey Keene, they prioritize him over Daquan Finn and to decide to go in that direction. This is a guy that has that familiarity with Chip Lindsey as he tries to install his offense here at Michigan, somebody that he knows really well and is scouted by nature of having him as his quarterback at UCF. So, I think the fit there makes a whole lot of sense, even if, you still have some questions, which we'll talk about him moving up a level from the Mountain West to the Big Ten.
Yeah, so much of the conversation around the portal QB has to be less about what you would prefer that Michigan did. This is from the fan perspective to what was realistic and why it fits. I think Michigan fans were hoping that the money cannon that landed Bryce Underwood would help them land a Miller Moss or a Caden Salter or a John Mateer, whatever, shooting for the stars. But when you, and we've had this conversation a few times already, like when you open up door number one, and that includes having Bryce Underwood as your quarterback, which is the preferred option. I think that sort of locks off that upper tier of what you might have been able to do otherwise. So for Michigan, Billy Edwards was kind of the guy that when he was kind of really the first name linked to them that came out. It's clear that maybe that was at the top of their board, and then you have to go down, the options from there. And it was Finn, it was Brendan Lewis from Nevada. Winds up being Mikey Keene. And he's a guy that, again, I think that when you juxtapose it up against what you've brought in against what you're losing right now is Jack Tuttle, who retired halfway through the year, Alex Orji in the transfer portal, Jaden Denegal in the transfer portal, and you bring in Bryce Underwood, and then you bring in a guy who's thrown for, I think, a little over 8,000 yards in his career with 65 total touchdowns. There is no argument to be made that your quarterback room is not better than it was. It was one of the, no disrespect to the guys. I think the world of, the Davis Warrens of the world, Alex Orji is a great guy, but that's one of the worst quarterback rooms in the modern history of Michigan football. And it cost them games this year. And something that we talked about that we liked about the Chip Lindsey hire was that it was a solid, shrewd football move that we don't know how high it raises your ceiling, but your floor is much higher. I think that adding a guy like Mikey Keene to me falls into that category. The question right off the bat, I'm sure we'll get to it, is Does he win the starting job? How long does he hold on to the starting job? It's really impossible to know any of those things right now.
Right.
But when you have the infrastructure of having a veteran quarterback who's a 1-year stopgap, that's all this is, that's played in, if I don't know if it'll be the same offense, but you've played under the new coordinator and Chip Lindsey.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of sense, and it checks a lot of boxes. And is it an easier path to Bryce Underwood taking over? Hell yeah, it is. But that's probably the best situation for the 2025 Wolverines as well.
We talked about this on our show that we recorded right before Mikey Keene committed, which, of course, anytime you record something in this business during a time like the transfer portal window, it's bound to date itself immediately. And a lot of the stuff we talked about didn't date itself.
If you're watching the video version, I have my coat on. We recorded. I put my coat and my shoes on. I went to go salt the driveway and then get out of the house. And then you check your phone, and of course, news breaks. So
the man's got Christmas shopping to do. Yeah, probably.
No, my shopping's done. I'm not a December 23rd guy.
Well, then I don't know where you were going, but the portal stops for no man. So as soon as you put that coat on, something's going to happen.
Maybe I did it on purpose.
Exactly. Force the news, force their hand. But we talked about this on the show that is also in the podcast feed on the YouTube channel here, that they needed another quarterback no matter what, because you have 4 coming into this next season. That's assuming Davis Warren and Jaden Davis do stay. And 2 of those guys, the other 2, Bryce Underwood and Chase Herbstreit, are going to be true freshmen. Now, Bryce Underwood is going to compete for the job and play right away, I'm sure, in some capacity, but he's still a freshman. You're still light on numbers at that spot. You'd like to get to 5. So no matter what, they were going to add somebody. And this is somebody in Mikey Keene who I think can come in and compete for the starting job. Now, it's going to be a constant battle for him to remain Michigan starter if he does win the job. As Jim Harbaugh put it best, a couple of years ago, and he said it multiple times, the starting quarterback position is rented, or you don't own the quarterback position. It's leased
at best.
Rented, or it's leased at best. Sorry, I just totally botched that. And he's right. You saw it this year, right? If you're not head and shoulders above or better than the other options, you can't make too many mistakes before the next guy comes in. So, Mikey Keene is willing to come in here and compete. Like we said, I think having that trust there with Chip Lindsey is important. Now, the big question is, how is this going to translate to the Big Ten? He played at UCF. That was before UCF moved into the Big 12. He played at Fresno State, has some experience in his career against power conference teams, but those weren't the caliber of opponents that he was facing on a weekly basis at UCF in Fresno State. Do have some numbers here, his splits against different conferences, and has fared pretty well against some of the bigger conferences. Against the Big Ten, he's 83 of 123. That's 67.5 completion percentage for 820 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 picks. Of course, 2 of those picks coming against the Michigan Wolverines. One of them, a pick 6 by Will Johnson late in the game in the season opener in 2024 here this season. Pac-12, he's 32 of 49, 281 yards, 2 touchdowns. Against the SEC, 1 game, 14 completions on 22 attempts, 144 yards, 1 touchdown. So he does have some experience against these types of opponents. They did go in, and I want to say they beat Purdue in 2023 in that season opener. I'm switching here. People can watch on the screen. They did win that game 39-35. He went 31 of 44 for 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, over 360 yards, 366 in that game. So he's got some experience. I think that's one of the bigger things he brings to the table. 39 games, 34 starts. 39 games, 34 starts. Wink Martindale talked about this year how Michigan was on a ridiculous run of playing quarterbacks that had a bunch of experience, that were starting games in their 30s. Dylan Gabriel, Curtis Rourke, Indiana's quarterback who came over from Ohio. I think that could be more of a blueprint, I think, for Michigan, is you have this guy at Ohio that played pretty well, if you're Indiana, at a lower level, has a bunch of games under his belt, did some good things, was one of the top players in the MAC for a couple of years, then transfers up, has more weapons around him. They did a good job getting wide receivers. Of course, Indiana brought in a bunch of guys from JMU. and he was able to kind of run that offense, control it. It was kind of the perfect quarterback for that style, the RPO game. It's not a one-to-one comparison in what Michigan's going to run and who Mikey Keene is, but experience matters. I mean, it can play a big factor. I think the one concern for me is probably the size at 5'11". You got to make up for what you lack in size in some other areas, and he's very accurate. He can push the ball downfield at times, but when there are bigger, faster guys chasing you down, it could be a little bit of a different challenge, I think.
Yeah, I'm not going to break him down for anything more than what we know him to be. The question is, ideally from a Michigan perspective, he's able to adequately hold down the fort until Bryce Underwood is ready. Now, does that mean Bryce Underwood is ready on August 30th? I don't know. Does that mean Bryce Underwood is ready coming out of the first bye week? I don't know. Does that mean Bryce Underwood isn't ready until November of next year? It's impossible to say. Again, when you look at the things that Keane does well, he's not a mobile guy, but I think he does well to evade pressure and keep plays alive. I think that's important. That's a skill that, even when a guy like Davis Warren was playing well this year, that's not really something he really displayed. So how do you retrofit what he does into this Michigan offense? And to be honest with you, to a certain extent, we don't know 100% what this Michigan offense will look like. Now we think that under Chip Lindsey, it's going to be, he's got a long track record of dialing up more explosives. I think the screen game, the quick game is going to be a little bit more baked into what they like to do. For me, it's like, can you limit your turnover worthy throws, and can you make the appropriate throws, which those windows are going to be much tighter at this level for Keane. So again, I think it's, when you distill it all down, it is probably, if I'll just say this, if the board went past Keane in terms of having to expand it via the transfer portal, I don't know that I'd be very confident that it's like a huge upgrade or a huge asset as a guy to learn along Bryce Underwood and get this offense installed. But Keane makes the most amount of sense to me, while having, I think that probably DeQuan Finn had a higher ceiling. I think Billy Edwards is a guy that had a much higher ceiling than his time at Maryland would suggest that he would have. So, not to compare and contrast, I think it's a fine addition. I think that I think that he will be able to hold down the fort for a bit. I think they'll play together, but I don't think there's any reason that they can't kind of replicate for him what Cade McNamara was in 2021, with Bryce Underwood playing the JJ McCarthy role. Although I think that Bryce probably plays that to a much more, much larger extent. And then we'll see what happens from there. But it was always going to take a special guy. It was going to take a guy that, from the start, the second he throws his first incomplete pass, the second that he throws his first interception, we know what our message board is going to look like. We know what social media is going to look like. To a certain extent, we might know what the big house will kind of groan at if they see that. So it was going to take a guy that could be able to withstand that. And I think that Keane, without knowing him as a person, the type of player he is, I think this makes sense for them.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of pressure off of Bryce Underwood as well, that you do have another guy there who has experience, who knows the offense, or like you said, at least partially what Chip Lindsey wants to do, at least how he calls a game, that sort of thing. And as Bryce Underwood comes along and maybe is a great quarterback right away, then he'll take over the job. But, at least gives you a little bit of a buffer here. And I will say, I think you hope Davis Warren sticks around if you're Michigan as well, because you at least know what he is. You know that, he's a leader out there, that he has been in some big games now after 1 year under his belt. He's just a great guy to have around the building as well, and help with the quarterback room and everything else. So, and compete too for playing time, because, he's probably thinking, hey, I'm the guy that ended up being the best option this year. I'll have a chance in the future, regardless of who's here. He's a confident guy. And if you're watching on the screen, we do have the quote up here from Anthony's article about from Sharon Moore talking about Mikey Keene. Not always do you have a quote, before a guy's actually signed, but they face this guy, and he talked about he gets the ball out quick. The offense runs through him. He kind of makes them go, and it does a good job with his accuracy. So, I think Sharon Moore probably was impressed scouting him and watching the film, and going into the game. I think the defensive coaching staff probably has some knowledge of him too, just based on having to scout him going into that season opener. But it should be pretty interesting. I think last thought from me as we wrap this up is a lot of what this Michigan offense is going to be is going to have to do with who the quarterback is, but it's also going to have to do with who's around that guy. My whole thought coming into this season was, okay, there's uncertainty at quarterback. We'll see. Is it going to be Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle, Davis Warren? But if they have a good offensive line, if they have a good run game, you had Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings, you have a great tight end. If the wide receivers can step up, and they really didn't to that extent that we would have liked to see, then you might have something here. They still need to make some other additions to make this work, no matter who's going to be the quarterback. You need to get better at wide receiver. You have to upgrade the offensive line. They're working towards doing that. You may add another running back here. Justice Haynes from Alabama is one of the guys on the board. So you got to set whoever this is up for success. Otherwise, you're looking at something similar to this season, and you don't want to do that. Of course, you probably have more upside at quarterback with Underwood in the fold, maybe with Mikey Keene in terms of what he could bring, but you want to build some, you want to be a really good offense. You don't want to just be okay this next year and improve from where you were, which was a pretty bad offense. You want to be really good. So some other big additions are going to have to come.
Yeah. Now I think you turn your attention to the infrastructure. You turn it to fortifying the offensive line. I think, and I actually have it on good authority. We all do. We look at the target board. Like, they're going to add another wide receiver. They're maybe in the mix for Max Clare. We'll see. Seems like he might be trending towards Ohio State, but now that you have the last 2 weeks, by hiring Chip Lindsey, by bringing in Mikey Keene, you set yourself a good foundation. There's a floor now, I think, to what this offense can be, which is, I think, probably, still a major upgrade from what they were this past season. You go from
already.
I think so. But by virtue of having a play caller who's been doing this for well over a decade at the Power 4 level, and a quarterback who's played a lot of games. They didn't have either of those things last year. So I like where they're at in that respect. I think that inherently probably brings out more from the guys that are already on the roster, and then you make some additions from there. Now you see, like, how much better can they make this team? I like some of the wideouts that they're in on. I like that, again, seems like some quality offensive linemen they're still in the mix for. It's going to be interesting to see. But now, in terms of how you play it with Underwood, in terms of how I think what you probably do with a guy like him, and we'll break this down, I'm sure, in more detail. Sorry, my phone's blowing up here. Hopefully it's a transfer portal wide receiver commit as I get ready to leave the house again.
No, that'll come as soon as we get off air. Yeah.
That's right. I think you probably play it with Underwood where you're installing the packages for him on what he's going to bring differently when he comes into the game for Mikey Keene. And then when he's able to do the things that Keene does well, better than Keene does, is when you start having that conversation of when you turn it over. So when it comes to the stuff that he'll do differently, I think it's obviously it's the mobility, it's the QB run sort of stuff. So that's my early read on it. I'm excited to see how it shakes out. This is I think that it was a very competently made offensive coordinator hire and a very competent, shrewd move to add Mikey Keene. So I like what they've done so far. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they're going to the playoff next year, but the arrow is pointing upward, in my opinion.
It's going to be a big decision when we look back at between Daquan Finn, Mikey Keene, how this works out. This is one of the bigger moves of the Sharon Moore era, of the Chip Lindsey era offensively for Michigan. I will say, I think they still have a lot of work to do in terms of upgrading the offensive line, figuring out what we're going to do to replace Colston Loveland's production, and figuring out what potentially your offensive MVP in Kalel Mullings was, what the replacement is going to be there. But like you said, it seems like they're working on that, and nothing's final yet. So to judge it right now would be foolish. We're not going to do that. We will continue to keep you updated over at thewolverine.com for all things Michigan football, basketball, NIL, transfer portal, recruiting. Head to thewolverine.com. Use the promo code UM1 for 2 months of premium access for just $1. Like the video. Subscribe to our channel. We got much more coming on the video front over at the Wolverine, and we will see everyone next time.